Thanks for joining us here at Rose Quartz Mediumship podcast, where we simply adore anything and everything healing and metaphysically based. Today, I am joined by Laura Rogers, who is a dear friend of mine and a client who I worked with for multiple years. And I wanted to bring her onto the podcast and have her join us and chat with us a little bit about boundaries and how she got into the place that she is right now with setting and holding boundaries. So thank you so much for joining us, Laura. I'm so excited to have you here with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a little bit of background on Laura. She runs a personal training business in San Diego, California called Fury Functional Fitness. And working on strength and wellness and health, an aspect that she demonstrates and models that I just simply adore is emotional well-being and psychosocial health and healing. And a big difference in Laura compared to many other personal trainers is in her ability to set and hold boundaries and her willingness to work with the whole human, not just strength training or not just fitness goals, but that Laura treats the entire human, which is one of the things that I love the most about her business. And I know her clients do as well. So, if you don't mind, Laura, tell us a little bit about how you landed in a spot that you are so phenomenal at setting and holding boundaries.
Yeah. So I believe that in setting boundaries, we are responsible for the ways that people treat us. So we give people permission to treat us how they do. And a part of that is by setting and holding boundaries. And so if we're not setting and holding boundaries and someone treats us negatively, and we allow it to continue, then we're basically allowing them to continue to cross our boundaries. So, to me, in learning how to set and hold boundaries, it was important for me to take responsibility over the ways that I felt I was mistreated. Um, when people would cross a boundary and I was upset about it, I had to recognize that I wasn't necessarily upset by what the person was doing, but that I was upset because I allowed them to do it. I didn't change what I was allowing in my own reality, and that was ultimately the thing that was bothering me. I'm not responsible for how people treat people, but I'm responsible for how people treat me. Um, and it took a lot of work to get to the place to recognize that ultimately it's my responsibility. And it sounds really wild for me to acknowledge that or to say that because I've been in past relationships where I was wildly mistreated. And it was, I was a survivor or I was a victim. Um, and certainly I think that the ways that other people treat me was shitty. Can I say shitty?
Yeah.
Um, but in taking responsibility for my role in allowing that treatment has definitely forced me to really take a solid stand on like when I don't like what's happening, if I'm angry or upset or hurt, that I have the ability to change that. I can't change what they do, but I can set a boundary and I can hold a boundary. Um, and if that means by setting and holding a boundary that I have to create distance between myself and someone else, that's okay. Um, and the wild thing about learning how to set boundaries is like for me, it was always like I thought there were going to be so many repercussions for creating a boundary. Like, oh, if I say that I can't work on this day, I'm going to lose a bunch of clients. Or if I don't just have a super flexible schedule, it's going to be a problem. If I don't answer someone's phone call right away, they might quit. And the more practice I had in setting them and realizing like, oh, there's actually like not that many repercussions for it. And the people who have an issue with me holding and setting a boundary, like that's their issue. Um, and if they're angry about that, that's not my problem. Um, I don't have to take that on. But I was massively surprised just by like actually how easy it was for most people in my reality, especially people that care about me, to be like, oh, okay, that's great. Like, I
Yeah.
hadn't had all of these wild expectations that it was going to mean so much more, be so significant to other people. And I was like, oh, it's actually very fine.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting how we create these big stories in our mind about what will happen, right? When we set a boundary, when we hold a boundary, that there's going to be all of these consequences that we don't want, right? And so that space of not wanting a consequence of setting and holding a boundary can prevent us from ever setting and holding the boundary. And when we have enough experience with it, we recognize that typically there are very few consequences of setting and holding a boundary that are negative, and there's actually a ton of positive consequences, right? There's a lot of positive side effects of setting and holding a boundary with a client, with a family member, with a friend, inside of a relationship, whatever it is, with ourselves, right?
Great.
And that story that we create in our mind, and we almost like catastrophize things, right? Like, if I don't answer this text, if I'm not available 24/7, if I say no to working on a specific day, that all my clients will leave, or this client will leave, or whatever. It's oftentimes a very catastrophized story. And
Yeah, for a period of time with my business, I was working 7 days a week and I was opening and I was closing and I was just running myself into the ground. And I think there was like 14 weeks where I worked every single day for 14 weeks. And I decided I was going to take one day off because it was the day after a friend's wedding. And people were like, why are you taking the day off? And I was like, oh, I created these monsters
yes.
because everyone assumed that I worked every day. And as soon as I said, well, like, you take a day off of work, you take 2 days off of work, or everybody's like, oh, yeah, yeah, you should take a day off work. And I was like, yeah. And then it was a non-issue. And then it took me a couple of months. And then I decided, like, I'm going to take one day a week off completely. Like, I'm just never going to work on Sundays. The gym will just be closed on Sundays. And I was like, and a ton of people are probably going to leave because they really want to work out 7 days a week. And this is going to be really a big problem, but I'm ready to deal with the consequences. And I stopped working on Sundays and nothing changed.
Yes.
People changed their schedules. It
Mhm.
was totally fine. They could do something else on a Sunday instead of work out with me. They can go for a walk or go somewhere else. And it was like, but for years, I really thought that like if I took any time off, it was going to be such a big problem. And yeah, it was a non-issue. And then especially when I explained to people like, well, I don't want to work 7 days a week. Most people don't work 7 days a week. Everybody was like, yep, that's totally reasonable. Like I wouldn't want to work 7 days a week either. And yeah, it just never became an issue. And I still to this day don't work on Sundays. And now it's been like 5 years of being closed on Sundays. And everybody now knows I don't work on Sundays. And so sometimes even someone will send a text message on a Sunday and be like, I'm so sorry to bother you on your day off. And it's like, oh yeah, I'm happy to answer a text message, but because I held that so firmly and I've never really strayed from it, occasionally I can decide like, oh, I'll move someone to a Sunday. But because I held it so firmly, like everybody knows, it's just closed on Sundays. It's just not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Great.
It's amazing how once we get over that hurdle of all of the fear-based thought patterns that we create in our mind, and we actually just do it, we realize that humans are pretty understanding, especially when we're able to talk in a calm, grounded way about why it is that we're making specific choices, why it is that we are setting specific boundaries. And most people can understand it and
Right.
will meet us right where we're at.
Right. And I now understand that the people who are angry when you set a boundary are generally people who benefit from you not having them.
Yes.
And so it says a lot about a person when you hold your boundary to see how they respond. So I have some thoughts and beliefs about texting and calling and sending emails and things. Um, that someone doesn't have to respond right away.
Mhm.
I don't expect a response right away from people. That gives me the freedom to say, like, I don't also have to respond right away. This is a boundary. Maybe I'm just not at the space to handle this right now. Um, and when someone gets really angry about that, like calls a bunch or is like, you didn't answer, you didn't answer, you didn't answer, what's wrong, what's wrong? It's like, why are you so uncomfortable by me not responding right away? Like, what did you gain by me answering your text immediately? Um, and so it says a lot when somebody can't even, yeah, responding to a text message. It's like people I don't think even see those things as boundaries because we just live in the society of like everything is urgent. So as soon as you see a text message, you should answer it. As soon as you see an email, you should respond. And it's like, we don't owe anyone that. I don't
Yes. Yeah.
owe anyone that time, that urgency. I can see a message and respond later or never respond. And like, that's okay. And when you hold even like small boundaries like that and you see the ways that people react, you're like, that says more about you and what you get from me than it says about me just not responding immediately.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a real opportunity for anyone who's sitting here listening going, "Ooh, cringe, that's me," right? Like I send a text and then if somebody doesn't answer, then I send four more texts or I call them and I ask them, "Are they okay?" or whatever. If there's somebody who's listening and hearing this and seeing themselves in that experience, um, what advice would you give them?
Oh, that's a tough one. Yeah, I mean, again, and this took me a long time. Like, I started setting work boundaries and like time boundaries before I started setting and having an understanding of like communication boundaries. Um, and I only even brought that example up because people fight me on that one a lot as like, that's not a boundary. I'm not crossing someone's boundary by calling them 20 times because I really needed them. Um, so I just kind of love that example as like, nope, that's still okay. People still don't have to respond right away. I think for me, in learning that for myself, when I get anxious or upset if someone's not answering right away, it's very important for me to return to like, this isn't life or death. Like I had a friend running some errands for me when I got out of the hospital, and they kept calling because they wanted to see if I wanted like this type of chip versus this type of chip. And I didn't answer because it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, I'm doing something else. If you get zero chips, it doesn't matter. If you get the wrong chips, it doesn't matter. Like, it's not life and death. And so to remind myself, like when I feel this like, ugh, this urgency of like, I want to call again is like, do I really need to call again? Like, and to remind myself of like what's most likely happening is that they're busy,
Yes.
they're asleep, they're driving. Like, it's not that they're not answering my phone call because they hate me, that they'll call back when they can. And if they don't call back, then I now have new information about my relationship with that person. But continuing to call is just crossing their boundaries because I've called once.
Yes.
They'll see that. And so if I want people to respect my boundaries, I also have to respect other people's. And that was also like a massive thing for me to learn with boundaries was, yeah, if I want to have any expectation of holding them and people respecting them, I need to respect other people's. Um, and
Absolutely.
that was also a tough pill for me to swallow because I wanted really hard, like I really, really wanted to learn how to do it and to no longer like always bend over backwards for everyone. But then I would see someone else setting a boundary and I was like, I want to poke at that, or like I'm upset that they get to do this thing. And it was like, nope, you can't do that really. Like if I want to be honest with myself, I have to take responsibility for my, I think like my gut reaction to like cross someone else's boundary is like, and it's like, I lose all respect if I don't hold other people's boundaries with the same level of esteem as I want people to hold mine.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that piece that you're bringing out right there. That was something that was really hard for me too. When I first started really deeply exploring boundaries, recognizing just how many boundaries I crossed of other people's in ways that I didn't even recognize was crossing a boundary. Like if somebody said to me, "Oh, I can't meet you on dinner for dinner on Thursday night." And if I said, they say it like, I have to do blankety blank. And I would give them the suggestion of how they could rearrange their schedule so that I could get what I wanted, which was to go to dinner with them. Right.
Yeah.
And when I really started realizing, holy cow, I am just stomping all over everyone's boundaries. And these people who I love and I care about, and they're important in my life and I want them in my life. And yet I was so quick to step on people's boundaries. And I didn't even see that at the time when I first started in working in the boundary realm. I didn't even see that as a boundary. I didn't even see that as crossing someone else's boundary. I just thought, oh, we're just having a conversation and finding a solution. And then I had to realize I was stepping all over other people's boundaries.
Yeah. And that is a tough pill to swallow, but I think in order to get to that place, you really have to take responsibility for that. Um, I also have like a couple of very poignant examples that I am thinking of that you and I had discussed years and years ago, where I was like mad that someone else was holding a boundary. And I had to also like accept that I wasn't mad that they were holding a boundary. I was mad that I wasn't as good at doing it as they
Yes.
were. Like I was envious of their ability to do it. And I respected their ability to say, like, I need space. I need the X, Y, and Z, because I was so incapable of doing it. And so I was always like, well, everyone is crossing my boundary. No one is doing this. No one is giving me the space that they give these other people. And it was like, oh, because I actually wasn't holding a boundary. I would take space and then someone would ask me a question and I would immediately respond. And I was like, oh, I'm envious because everyone respects their boundaries because they hold them.
Yes.
I wasn't holding any boundaries. I assumed that everyone should just know what it is that I wanted and operate accordingly. And if they weren't doing it, then it was them. Like it was they were the issue. And it was like, oh, I'm envious of people that can hold boundaries because I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
That's a tough pill to swallow as well.
Yeah, I want to pull two pieces out that I'm hearing you talk about here and kind of separate them out. One
Yeah.
is the piece of that feeling angry when someone else is setting a holding a boundary, especially if you're new to setting and holding boundaries, right? And that's really oftentimes rooted in envy or jealousy,
Mhm.
right? Like we see them setting and holding a boundary and we're mad at them, but really we're just jealous, right? That's what's
Mhm.
underneath the anger. And I love how beautifully you brought that out because I think that a lot of people go through that. And there's another thing I want to talk about boundaries in a minute. So hopefully I don't forget. I love the piece that you pulled out there around not communicating our boundaries, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes we think that people can read our mind and they should know that we don't want the thing or we do want the thing or whatever, that this thing is not okay. And I love how you brought that piece out, right? Around the jealousy component. That oftentimes, if we're new to setting and holding boundaries, we don't recognize that we have to communicate our boundary. It doesn't even cross our mind because that's how far from setting and holding boundaries we are. We just assume that people should know, that they
Right.
psychically know that we have a boundary.
Yeah. In all of the like self-development work that I do and have done over the last, 10 or 15 years, I constantly have to remind myself that I'm not a mind reader and other people are not mind readers. And
Yeah.
I like have this conscious conversation in my head a lot is like, I can't read their mind. If I have confusion, I should ask. And then I have to give everyone the same grace. Is like, they can't read my mind. So if I'm expecting someone to know that I'm in a bad mood, that I don't want to answer the phone, whatever, like they're not going to know. And so how would I feel if I was in their shoes with all of this unclear, muddy communication? It's like, okay, so I can just state it. I can't answer the phone. I'm busy with work. I can talk to you in 7 hours or whatever it is. And then it's been clear. And then if they call me at some point in the next 7 hours, I can be like, I've set this boundary. You have now crossed it. I told you when I would be free. And now I might need even more space from you. And I've had to do that with a couple of people. And you do that once or twice, say, like, this is it. If you continue, I've said this is when I'm free and when I'm not free, and you continue to call. Now I'm just not going to talk to you, maybe today at all. They stop calling when you say that you're unavailable.
Yeah.
They will change their behavior to meet your boundary. Um,
Yeah. And that goes into the part about we train people or we teach people how to treat us,
right.
right? That's the personal responsibility piece that's so important. If we don't set and hold a boundary and communicate and when somebody walks across our boundary, if we just allow them to walk across our boundary, we are literally telling them, teaching them, training them that it's okay to cross our boundaries. Yeah. And that personal responsibility piece, I think, is something that can feel difficult if you're new in the personal development world or realm.
Yeah, I think it was maybe one of the last pieces that I understood about boundary work. Um, it, but once I was able to really understand that component of it, it just magically, like not magically, but like very quickly helped me actually hold it. Like I had to take responsibility for, I didn't actually set a boundary. if I continued to let someone cross it. Um, there just wasn't a boundary there. So I couldn't be mad that they were crossing my boundary. I had just actually never set one. Um, and that's hard to get to the place because then you have to start taking responsibility for any sort of behavior you've allowed in your life. Um, you get to the place where you say, like, oh, but I was so poorly treated in this situation. That was entirely their responsibility. And then once you really become very clear on boundaries, you have to say, like, I was a part of that. I allowed and I taught people how I would allow them to treat me. And people are surprised when I talk about that piece of it because I have been in an abusive relationship and getting to the place now where I can say that, like, I allowed that mistreatment is, I think, very surprising for people to hear. Because, yeah, it felt in the moment, like in the time that I was in it, that it was being done to me. Um, to now have some like hindsight and recognize, like, I was allowing that behavior is a hard one, right? But to be honest, like, you have to take that responsibility um, in order to really understand and continue to move forward with holding boundaries.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, when we can take radical personal responsibility for our entire reality, that's when our life can change hugely. If we're not able to take that personal responsibility, we can't change. And so that piece that you're talking about where things really like clicked and moved really quickly once you were able to take radical personal responsibility for your role in the abusive relationship, it is magical, right? You use the word magical, and I was like, that's the perfect word. Like it magically happened because you got it. It clicked, right? And that happens for us all in various different ways. And it's always really interesting to watch people have that moment where it clicks, where they get it, where they are able to say, I take personal responsibility for everything in my reality. And this is a concept that I talk about a lot in coaching, in workshops that I run, and people get really mad. Like people get really mad if this is a new concept for them. And the people who've gotten over that hump of really understanding it and all of the benefits of it are so empowered. Because if our reality is determined by other people, that's a really disempowered position for us to be in. But when we can take radical personal responsibility for what's happening in our reality and how the role that we play in it, then it means that we are able to shift our reality hugely. And people oftentimes will say to me, so I'm responsible for how they acted? No, that is not at all what I said.
Right.
That is not at all what I said. You're never responsible for how someone else behaves or acts, but you are responsible for the fact that you allowed it in your reality, right? The first time that something happens could be the last time if you set and hold a boundary.
Right.
But when something is happening on repeat in our reality, and we think that we're the victim, right? It's happening to me, then we are not owning the personal responsibility component of what is the role that I'm playing in this dynamic, because we're co-creating relationships with people. We're co-creating dynamics, and we do play a role.
Yeah, I was very good about being like, if this ever happens again,
Yeah.
I am out. And then it would happen again. And I would be like, this is the last time I'm going to allow this to happen. And it would happen again. And every time you allow that, and instead of saying like, this will never happen again, I am no longer going to allow this, I am done, they have now learned that you actually will continue to move that line, that you've already accepted that it's an appropriate way to behave. And
Yeah.
so that if they do it again, there really won't be a consequence because there hasn't yet been a consequence. So what will make the next time any different? I've done it 10 times. She's been okay with it. I can do it 10 more times. Um, it makes sense, right? I mean, that's like with little kids or something, like
Yes.
they're operating off of what they know to be true. And what I was allowing was that they could treat me or behave in any way and that there wouldn't be a consequence. Um, and I really thought I was being really good by being like, next time. But yeah, you've already allowed it. You've already said that it's okay. So why would someone change that?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I give the example around little kids all the time because it's so simple and easy to see because we also know that they're coming from a very different place than adults, right?
Right.
I always love to give the example if you're in the grocery store with your children and your kid wants a candy bar and they have an enormous fit and you give them a candy bar, guess what's going to happen next time, right? You've just trained them to have a really big fit and you'll give in, right? And the same thing happens in relationship, whether it be work or family or platonic or romantic. We train people to behave a specific way. And we're responsible for that training, right? So if I give you the candy bar when you have a big fit because I want you to stop having a big fit, because maybe I'm embarrassed and I can't sit in the embarrassment of being in the grocery store with my kid crying, so I give you the candy bar. Next grocery shopping trip, you're doing the same thing.
Right. Because
Yeah,
you didn't actually hold the boundary.
exactly.
You have to, and like sometimes there are consequences when you hold a boundary. Sometimes you say, I don't work Sundays, and you have a client that says, I really, really only want to work out on Sundays, and you lose that client. There's a small consequence, right? You've lost some money or maybe that relationship with that person, but that's still okay because it's still very important. So it's like maybe your kid will be still upset that you didn't give them the candy bar, but they're allowed to be upset and you are allowed to still say they can't have a candy bar.
Yeah, they're probably going to be upset, right? Like the candy bar example, they're probably going to be upset that they get
Right.
a candy bar. But if you don't give it to them, then the next time they don't have the story in their mind. If I have a big enough fit, mom will give me the candy bar.
Yeah.
And the piece that you're saying there around people need to do what's right for them, right? So when we say the boundary of I'm not going to work on Sundays, and you've got somebody who says, well, Sunday is one of the days that I'm available to work out, and I'm really looking for a personal trainer who can work on Sundays, they should go pursue that. They
Right.
deserve to be able to work with a trainer on Sundays. You're not available for that, and there's no problem there. And there's no problem that they want to be trained on Sundays.
Yeah. I I like to call myself a recovering people pleaser. I'm working on it. I was a people pleaser for 35 years or something of my life. And so I wanted to be like, okay, well, I'll change it so I can work on Sundays for you. And I just thought everything was very important. Like it was so significant. But I took everything so personally as like, well, then if they can't work out with me on a Sunday and then they're going to leave and then I have somehow done something personally wrong. And it's like, nope. They could think I'm an amazing trainer. They could think I'm an amazing person. I live in San Diego. There are thousands of personal trainers here. they can find another personal trainer and it actually has nothing to do with me. And then when you have people who do stay with you, it does show a personal level, right? And then you can take those things like these people have stayed with me through a lot, and that is because of who I am. And the people that have to, they have to move, they have to, work out at a different time. Something here has changed that doesn't work for them. It's like, that's okay. They should get what they want out of this. They're not obligated to work with me forever. And it doesn't mean anything about me as a human.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't it interesting how we so frequently will personalize what somebody else needs to do for themselves as if we have done something wrong,
Right.
right? Instead of being able to step back and recognize this human is doing what they need to do for themselves and good for them, go them, right? We create this story that we have done something wrong. It's somehow about us,
Right.
and it's not.
Yeah. And I think that is oftentimes why we don't set boundaries, is because, and also why we don't respect other people's boundaries. So we think it's personal, right? And so I call someone, they don't answer. I don't like that they are not answering. I think this has something to do with me. I'm going to call and call and call and call. And so they can then assuage my concern and say, like, it's not you. It was this. I was busy. But if I can just say, like, it's most likely that they're busy, it's if I can accept that it's probably actually not personal, then I can respect their boundary a lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah. Earlier, when you were talking about that urgency to like call or text or like, oh, which chip do you want or whatnot, I think that oftentimes that comes from a place of feeling like we are not enough, right? So we get a little bit of anxiety when somebody doesn't pick up the phone. And then we create this enormous story that they're somehow mad about something that we did last Thursday. They misinterpreted a conversation, but maybe maybe that is what happened, right? Like maybe they're literally taking space from us. But most likely, that's not the scenario. And when we have a lot of unhealed wounds around feeling like we're not enough and needing to be perfect, then it can create this urgency, right? I'm going to call again, right? Because I can't sit with the emotion that I'm feeling and be able to talk myself through this.
Right.
Be able to talk myself through that most likely it has nothing to do with last Thursday. They're probably just busy. And if it does have to do with last Thursday, I trust myself and them enough to be able to have a conversation and navigate through whatever happened last Thursday.
Yeah. And when you respect someone's boundary in the way that you want them to respect yours, you have to also say, like, maybe I did say something last Thursday.
Yes.
Maybe they are taking space from me. And that is also okay because they're entitled to take space when someone does something that hurts them. And I have to take responsibility for that too. And I cannot convince someone or talk someone out of taking space from me. I need to be responsible for my actions. Moving forward with that line of thought also allows you to be more mindful of the ways that you treat people in your life because it's also okay for them to hold a boundary and for there to be consequences against me. Now I understand that I can't operate through the world and treat people however I want to without consequences. So maybe I hurt my friend's feelings last Thursday. Hopefully, they will say, "Hey, you hurt my feelings," and I can take accountability and responsibility and apologize. But if they say, like, I've had this conversation with Laura enough times, and I have told her, don't say this thing, and I said it, and this was them finally saying, I've I've stated this boundary, I am holding this boundary, and now I don't want a friendship with you, then that's the consequence for me to say, like, they're entitled to hold that boundary. And I shouldn't have said the thing or done the thing that they had already expressed that they didn't want me to say or do. Um, and that's ultimately what we want other people to do to us. We then have to do the same.
Yes.
And then we learn from that and continue to respect people's boundaries in the same way we want them to respect ours.
Yes. Yeah. It goes in both directions, right? Like the setting and holding boundaries, and then the respecting other people's boundaries. And you get a deeper understanding. I love the piece that you're bringing out right now, that deeper understanding of the personal responsibility, right? If somebody says to me, hey, it hurts my feelings when you say blank, please don't say that to me. And I continue to say that to them. Maybe it happens periodically. Maybe it happens when I'm like a little snarky or whatever. I have to own that. And I have to own that if the friendship ends, it's a result of me not respecting their boundaries and not really seeing them as a person, right? If I really love you and you tell me, hey, don't do this thing, or don't say this thing, or this hurts my feelings, and I continue to do it, that's something I need to look at. And if I end up losing a friend because I haven't been willing to look at that, maybe that's the piece that finally gets me ready to start looking at what is going on for me. What is happening for me as a human, right? And so often we then want to put it on them, like, oh, she walked away from me, she abandoned me. Not so much, right? She communicated a really clear boundary. I crossed it multiple times, and she held her boundary.
Yeah.
She didn't abandon me.
And that's where I've learned the hard lesson with like the texting and the calling and the emailing and the urgency is that, yeah, I have done that before where I've just crossed someone's boundary enough and like called. And they've said, like, fuck that.
Yeah.
That's not cool. I didn't answer. I don't owe you a reason why I didn't answer.
Yeah.
And I've had to say, like, oh, yeah,
Ouch. I gotta look
ouch.
at myself. I gotta look at
Yeah, why did I have this need to call? What was I uncomfortable with? What feeling did I have that made me want to do that? And then, yeah, had to learn that consequence pretty, like, and it felt harsh or whatever, but it was like, okay. But it's in learning that made me even more solid in, like I put my phone on do not disturb when I sleep. I don't have to answer anyone's phone call in the middle of the night. I need to sleep. I will put my phone away for extended periods of time. And that's okay because I respect other people if I call them and they can't answer. I mean, I try really hard. Sometimes I'm like, I really want it. And it's like, okay, it's okay. Because yeah, I think that I deserve that and then other people deserve that too. And so there's always two parts of it. And you only really get good at holding boundaries if you're willing to respect other people's. You
yes.
can't only hold boundaries and then cross everyone else's.
Right.
It's not, it just doesn't work. You just don't actually fully embrace and understand it at all if that's the world you want to operate in.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I can vividly remember learning about setting and holding boundaries, and it was all like me setting and holding the boundaries. And when it really landed for me that I was simultaneously crossing other people's boundaries, that was when I really understood boundary work. And I really understood personal responsibility. And those things, those teaching moments, those lessons in my life were not comfortable, right? And also super important.
Right.
Super important.
Yeah. And I think in that you also have to accept that people's boundaries are different,
Yes.
that they're not the same as mine. And that I think when I first started, I was like, okay, well, I'm okay with this. And so they must also be okay with this. Everyone must have the same boundaries, the same line, the same limit. Um, and it took some time for me to accept, like, okay, I'm okay with answering this type of question or having this type of conversation, but maybe that's not where someone else feels comfortable. And in order to actually respect their boundary, I have to understand that it's theirs,
Yes.
that they get to set whatever boundary they want. And I might not understand it. It might be a totally different boundary than mine, but it's still theirs. And if I cross it, then there will be consequences. And I had a hard time really understanding just like how personal they were. I really wanted to be like, okay, yeah, but it's okay. I don't care if I do that or if someone else does that to me. So like I can do that to this other person. And it's like, nope, everybody gets to set whatever boundary it is that they want. Um, and it could be, you don't have to understand it. It's
Hmm.
not yours to understand. If this is the line that they draw, that's the line.
Yeah. Yeah, that piece I think is so important because I think oftentimes we think that we need to understand someone else's boundaries. Like, well, tell me why it is that this is your boundary. We actually don't need to know. We simply need to know that it is their boundary. And then we get to make a decision about whether or not we want to be in relationship or in connection with them, right? If we think that that is a ridiculous boundary, we don't have to be in connection with them.
Right.
Right? And it's like the piece of you don't want to work on Sundays. Somebody who really wants to be trained on a Sunday
Exactly.
can then say, I love you. You're awesome. I appreciate and value everything that you do, but I really want to be trained on a Sunday. And so I'm going to go find a trainer who trains on Sundays. And that piece of like, we don't have to understand why it is that you want a Sunday off. Like maybe to me, I'm like, I can't understand why you would want a Sunday off. That seems ludicrous. This seems like a really weird boundary for you to be holding. I just can't understand why you would want a Sunday off. I don't have to understand. I just need to know that that is your boundary.
Yeah. And I might not understand why someone wants to work out 7 days a week. But
Right.
if that's really, really important to them and they really, really want to work out every single day, then they, by all means, should do that. And I
Exactly.
don't have to understand that either.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that that is a part that takes a little bit more time, or did for me anyways. Doesn't mean that it will for anybody else. But for me, that piece of not needing to understand someone's boundary. It doesn't have to make sense to me. It doesn't have to. They don't owe me an explanation of why it's their boundary. They don't have to explain it to me. It doesn't have to make sense to me. I just need them to communicate what their boundary is. And then I can choose to either respect it or fall out of connection with them. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the like mind reader piece is super interesting, right? But I also think that people communicate their boundaries in different ways. And
Mhm.
so someone also doesn't have to explicitly say, like, this is a boundary. The
Right.
boundary is XYZ. That um, if someone says, I'm taking an hour,
They don't have to say that is a boundary, nor are
right,
they likely going to say that.
right. And so I when I first started working with boundaries was like, okay, I have to talk about boundaries. I need to say that this is a boundary, that I need to talk about your boundaries and my boundaries. And then I would encounter people who were really good at it and they never said the word boundary. And I was like, why don't you use the same terminology as me? Like, why aren't we? And it's like, oh, because in their mind, it's always been this is the thing that if you cross this line, then I am out. Then I create space. Then I ask you to leave. They didn't have to use the word boundary. And so it was important for me to realize like people can communicate it also in different ways.
Mhm.
And people will show you a boundary without having to state it. Like if I call and they don't answer, that's the boundary. Like that's it. They don't have to say, I'm setting a boundary right now. I am not able to answer the phone. That's they didn't answer. And I think thinking about like physical boundaries is really helpful. Like your house, right? Like the walls of your house and the door, like your a door is a very solid boundary. That like if someone were just to walk into your home, you would be like, whoa, 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 there's a door here.
Mhm.
That's what the door is for. I don't have to state that you can't walk in my front door. The door is the boundary. Someone not answering the phone is the boundary. Someone taking space is the boundary. They don't owe you an explanation of what it is, and they don't owe you an explanation of why.
Yes.
Just in the same way that I don't walk into my neighbor's front door, I don't walk into his house.
Right.
It doesn't need to be stated. I know that's
Right.
what the door is for.
He doesn't have to bring you over to his house and say, Laura, this is my door, and I want you to stay out on the outside of my house.
Right.
Right? That conversation never needs to happen. You
Yeah.
are able to see, like, oh, that's my neighbor's house and his door, and I could knock on it, and if he wanted to let me in, he would open it. And if he didn't, he wouldn't.
Great. And he doesn't have to open the door if I knock. He could
Right.
be in there. I could be like, I see you in there. And he still could be like, I don't want to open the door.
I'm not in the mood. I'm not wearing pants.
Right. And I think sometimes when you give people like seemingly ridiculous examples or whatever, like your house, and I people are like, oh, but it really just like drives in what the basis of a boundary is. And I think it was your example from years ago, which is like if you let someone into your house and they do something that you don't want, they come into your house and they start spray painting your walls, you can say like, you have to leave. This is my house. You need to leave my house. I can't make them, I don't have control over what they're doing. I have control over what I allow. And so I can say, but if I continue to allow them to spray paint in my house, then I didn't actually hold that boundary, right? And so, and I think you have another example of like cheating, right? If you're in a relationship with someone and you say, like, I don't want to be, I will not be in a relationship with someone who cheats on me. You're not saying that they can't have sex with other people. You're saying that I'm not going to be in a relationship with someone who has sex with other people. So if they then have sex with other people, I can't stop them from doing that, but I can say, like, I'm not going to now stay in this relationship.
Exactly.
Um, I'm not giving you an ultimatum and saying, like, you can't do whatever it is that you want with your body. People can do whatever it is that they want with their own body, but I don't have to stay in that relationship.
Exactly. And that's a piece that I think a lot of people miss with boundary setting, right? They try and tell someone else how they are going to behave, right? And that's not how it works. You can't say to someone, you may not spray paint walls. They're human, they have a choice, they can go spray paint walls. You can say you may not spray paint walls in my home. You may now leave,
Yeah.
right? But we can't tell them to not spray paint walls.
Yeah.
Just like we can't say to someone, you may not cheat on me. They can cheat on you. At which point in time you leave the relationship, right? If that's
Right.
the choice that you're making. We don't tell other people how they behave. We tell them what we are allowing or not allowing in
Right.
our reality.
Yeah. I can't tell my mom not to call me 15 times. I can say, if you do this again, or if you call me 15 times, I'm going to block you.
Hmm.
Then you won't call me at all. Um, and that's the piece of accepting that like we are responsible for the ways that other people treat us.
Yes.
Um, we have, yeah, trained them or allowed them to treat us however they want, and we think that we can then change their behavior. It's like we can't change their behavior, and everyone is entitled to do whatever it is that they want to do. But I get to decide if I'm going to allow that. And if I allow that, I have taught them that that is okay.
Yes. Yes. And that personal responsibility piece, right? Of like, we train people, we teach people on repeat how to treat us, how to speak to us, how to show up for us, how to not show up for us in all the various different ways, right? In all walks of our life too. We are training people just like we are being trained, right? So I'm training you just as much as you're training me when we're in relationship.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's important to also recognize that someone doesn't have to state it as a boundary for it to be a boundary, because they could cross it once and that could be the end.
Deal breaker.
I didn't need to give you warning. If you say that I'm stupid, if you call me dumb, it's not appropriate. You shouldn't talk to people that way. If you call me stupid, if someone were to come into my reality and demean me and say that I was stupid or an idiot, that's it. That's done. I will not allow that. I didn't need to tell them, hey, you shouldn't walk around and tell people they're dumb. I don't need their explanation for why they decided to call someone dumb, why to call me dumb. I can be like, that's it, right? There are some boundaries that don't need an explanation. If someone were to come into my home and break all of my furniture, I could be like, you're done. That's it. There is nothing. I didn't need to tell them in advance, hey, if you come into my house, don't break my furniture. I don't,
Yeah.
people don't owe me an explanation either, right? I didn't need to know it first. There are some that's like, if you put your hands on me, that is done. We know now in 2025 that we shouldn't resort to physical violence. Someone does it, that is the end. I didn't need to tell them ahead of time, hey, by the way, I don't allow someone to punch me.
Right. Right.
I think that's a given.
Right.
And if that's not a given for someone and they put their hands on me and I say, okay, well, next time, now you didn't know, and now I'm going to teach you. And next time, you've already crossed the boundary. You've already decided, already opened that up.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets really hard, like in abusive relationships, because you have to take responsibility for the first time that you let someone say something to you or do something to you that you knew like inside was wrong. And for me, I didn't recognize it as abuse because emotional abuse is like very insidious. It's these like little teeny things over time, and then you start to believe that they're true and that it's normal and that it's okay for your partner to call you dumb or say something to you that you feel icky about, and you allow it, and then you then start to question like, maybe I'm dumb, or you start to believe that you are the things that someone has repeatedly told you in very nuanced ways. And it's really hard. In my relationship, there was this aspect of like wanting me to be healthy. And so controlling what I would eat and how I looked in this like guise of like, it's in your best interest. I care about you so much that I want to make sure you I mean, the big thing for me was that I looked like a trainer. And it was important to them and in our relationship that I like have a six pack or whatever, because that's what a trainer looks like. And it was under this guise of like, this is healthy, this is appropriate, this is normal. And then it becomes so deep seated in you that you don't question it. Um, and it was really hard for me to see that afterwards and to recognize like that was abusive. It wasn't love. Um, if it was only love, then I can look how I want to look. I can eat what I want to eat. And if someone doesn't want to train with me because I don't have a six pack or whatever, then like they don't have to. Um, it became so hard for me to get out of that mindset because I just had heard it so much for so long that for years I like wanted to change my body so that I looked like a trainer. Um, and discounted like all of the education that I had done and all of the certifications I had done and my years of experience and because people don't necessarily want to train with a person who has a six pack if they're really great and really smart and really nice and have all these other things. And the people that want to train with a trainer who has a six pack, like they can go train with those people. But I think those trainers are pretty toxic. So like in my mind, maybe not. But the first time someone told me like that I looked too fat, I should have said like, that's fucked up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Don't comment on my body. Don't tell me how I should look. Don't tell me how much I should weigh. And I just wanted this relationship so much. And I didn't have the like self-worth and the confidence. And I thought it was okay for someone to tell me that. And so I continued to allow it. And so I think a large part of also setting boundaries is like self-worth, right? To like know that you are deserving of boundaries and you are deserving of kindness and love. And that when someone says something that is unkind or hurtful or hateful, that you can remove yourself then, that that can be enough.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that part that you're bringing out right now about how difficult it is when you're in an emotionally abusive relationship or toxic relationship or unhealthy relationship, whatever label you want to put on that, right? About how it's a bit disorienting, right? When you're in the middle of it, you don't oftentimes know just how unhealthy it is, just how abusive it is, just how toxic it is. And it can be so hard to get out.
Yeah. And I don't ever want to discount how difficult it is for someone to leave an abusive relationship, especially because it becomes so normal. Like the insidious nature of abuse, the ways that we normalize the treatment of it. I didn't know it was abusive. Like when I got out of the relationship and someone said like that sounds pretty abusive and I was like whew. I was like I got punched in the gut because I had never, I had said it was toxic. I had said this thing. I'd never like so when I heard the phrase abuse, and then when I started to recognize that I was in an emotionally abusive relationship, and I would tell people that, people were like, they didn't understand. Or people would be like, but you're so strong. How were you in this relationship? Like, and to try to explain to people that, like, you don't even know it when you're in it necessarily. Like, it becomes so much a part of you. You start to believe these things that someone is telling you. you recognize it as normal. You're paying attention. You've got like these like blinders on of like that this is maybe just what relationships are like. This is okay. This is appropriate. Everybody's doing this to their partner. You just don't see it, and you start to say like, okay, it's really hard. And then, in so many abusive relationships, there's this like cycle, right? Of like doing something horrible, making you feel some way, and then love bombing you and making you feel like you overreacted. I mean, the amount of times where I just felt crazy, where I was like, I swear something really horrible yesterday happened, but today is so great.
Yeah.
So, like, you get into this vicious cycle and you start to be like, well, maybe I'm crazy. Maybe this wasn't so bad. Maybe it was not, maybe it's okay. Maybe it won't happen again. And then you start to say like, okay, well, don't ever let that happen again. That was bad. But now it's okay. So, and then it just becomes, yeah, it's just this like very difficult cycle and becomes so deep-seated inside of you. But then there's so many other things that make things complicated, right? Like money and where you live and all of these things. It's like it's not so easy all the time to just say like, I will not allow this. I am out. Um, I lived with my partner. We shared money and I really felt very stuck. And it wasn't until I said like, nope, this is actually the end. I am actually done. It was I had to have some very hard conversations with people in my life and say like, I've gotten myself into this space and I am very stuck and I need to come clean about how bad the situation has really become
Yeah.
because I need your help because I can't get it. I can't sort it out on my own anymore. Because if I'd been able to sort it out on my own, I would have sorted it out by that point. And yeah, I mean, I had to like tell my friends and I had to tell my family, like, this is where I am. And I always, I think also partially as a people pleaser, I always wanted to do everything for everyone else. And I was really not good at accepting help. And it was really hard for me to say, like, I need help. I need someone else to come in and help me here. Um, I can't people please my way out of this. I can't solve all of this on my own. I can't do everything for everyone and get myself out. And it's really hard. And again, like I think a lot of people aren't even necessarily aware of their relationship. And when we're in these relationships, we like knowingly or unknowingly hide things from people. And it's like, oh, well, it's not my business to share because this is my partner's thing, or I don't want to talk badly about my partner, or, maybe I feel shame about what happened. And so I don't want to acknowledge that to people. And my like biggest thing with anyone now is like, if you're in a place where you don't want to tell anyone, you should take a look at that. Like, what is it that is holding you back from sharing that with someone you love? Like, I should have taken a really strong look at all of the things I was hiding from like my parents because I know my parents love me and I know my parents wouldn't want me in a spot. And by not sharing things, I didn't want to hear what they would have said. Wasn't ready to take responsibility for it. I wasn't ready to acknowledge it. And I remember finally when I did like come clean or whatever, my mom said, well, like, if something like this ever happens again, like, you'll tell us sooner. And I was like, you know what? I think that's kind of bullshit because I told you what I told you. Like, that was me telling you. There's no sooner. That was it. And people aren't going to be able to get out of those relationships any sooner than they're going to be able to get out of them. I mean, it's the like, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink thing. It's like, you have to also hold space for people to kind of figure it out on their own. But is much easier to figure it out when you're honest about what's happening and you're telling people what's going on and you're getting outside perspective. Because now I'll share a story from my relationship and someone will be like, what the f-? And I'm like, oh, that's not, that wasn't normal. Like I'll just be casually, you know. I mean, if I when I casually mentioned the amount the of times that my like food was restricted and I see people's faces and I'm like, oh,
There's feedback in there in
yeah,
the response from people who you're sharing with.
right. If I had shared that sooner, I maybe would have gotten that feedback earlier. Um, and yeah, so there's like so many things that go into it, but I have to acknowledge my role in it. And it's important for me to do that because, right, like you said, it's like it comes from an empowered space to recognize that like I wasn't, it wasn't just happening to me, that I allowed these things to continue and in a variety of ways. And one of the ways I allowed it was by not talking about it and not telling people because I didn't want to hear what they would say. And to be like, okay, I have to take responsibility for that. And not in a way to say, like, I need to beat myself up over it, but
Right.
in a way to acknowledge that, like, I have the ability to make sure this never happens to me again. Like, because now I understand. And I don't believe that anyone should be treated that way, but I know that I will never allow someone to treat me that way. And I also now I don't ever hold secrets. And if I'm in a relationship with someone and they do something that I don't like and I share it with a friend and my partner is like, "Oh, I really didn't want you to tell them that." It's like, "Well, you should sit with that." Because
Right.
I don't keep secrets now because it's very important for me to recognize that I like outside feedback. I need it. It's important for me to be 100% honest with the way that someone treats me, because I doubt myself a bit and I can get that feedback. And if I start to hide things or keep secrets from people that love me, it's a slippery slope for me.
Yeah.
So I'm going to share it. I'm going to share it with Erin. I'm going to share it with a therapist. I'm going to share it with my friend. I'm going to talk about it with my mom. Like, and if everybody says, like, and you're really embarrassed by what you said or did, then you should sit with that. But telling me to not share it with someone is a big enough red flag for me at this point to be like, okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
then you should change
That,
it.
that whole piece where if somebody's embarrassed that you're sharing something that they did, then they need to look at modifying their behavior and what created the scenario that I behaved like that, right? Rather than saying to you, you shouldn't be sharing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's the triggers conversation, right? Which is that like sometimes we are triggered and we behave in a way that we don't like. And we have to sit with like, what was that trigger? how did I get to that place where I behaved in a way that I don't like? And then again, take responsibility for it.
Exactly.
And if I was triggered and I behaved in a way that crossed someone's boundary and they decide like I didn't like that behavior, then I have to, that's okay. That I have to take that on. I don't have to say like, nope, you should be okay with it because I was triggered.
Right.
I had this reaction. It's like they don't owe me that. I have to sit with that and work through that and change my behavior.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think oftentimes we will give an excuse for somebody's behavior because we can understand where it came from. Just because we can understand where a behavior comes from does not mean that we give a permission slip for the behavior.
Yes.
And the same goes internally, right? Like, so for me, just because I can understand where behavior comes from inside of myself doesn't mean that I give the permission slip for the behavior. It means it's my responsibility to go look at that thing, that wound, that trauma, and heal it so that I don't behave that way.
Yeah. I think that was always my biggest thing, and I still struggle with that, is that I want to justify someone else's behavior because I understand they had this thing in their childhood. They had this thing, this has happened to them, they were in this relationship. And so I justify someone else's behavior. And like at the to the detriment of myself. Um, but also once you start to recognize that like I'm not responsible for justifying someone else's behavior, they're responsible for understanding their behavior. That's the first step. I mean, I don't even need to justify their behavior to say that it's not acceptable. And I can still say, okay, it's great that you looked at that and you now understand where that behavior came from. I'm still not responsible for accepting it,
Right.
right? Like, but I
Mhm.
was always like, well, other people should like now make the justification themselves. Like, why am I allowing this without them working on it themselves? And now it's like, okay, that was a good step to recognize it wasn't my responsibility to understand their triggers. It was their responsibility. And now it's like, not only is it their responsibility to understand their triggers, I still don't have to be okay with it.
That's right. Even if you can identify the trigger yourself and where it's coming from and work on it, it still doesn't mean that it's a behavior that you're going to allow in your reality.
Yeah. And if someone is working on those things, that's great. I still don't have to
Still,
be here while you work on it.
that's right. That's right. And that's a piece that I think a lot of people get stuck in. You know, if there's someone in their reality who they love and they're working on themselves, then it's almost like, oh, I owe it to them to stay around and let them work through this and support them and love them. Not always.
Yeah. And if you make that choice, you've made that choice. You have made that decision, and then you have allowed their treatment to continue. And again, like people don't have to set and hold boundaries.
Mhm.
And there are people who are like, my mom has always treated me badly. She's always treated me badly, but it's my mom. I'm never going to write my mom off. It's always going to be my mom. It's like, okay, but then you have to accept that is your choice.
Right. And don't walk around complaining when your mom treats you poorly. Like the
Right.
rest of us do not want to hear about how your mom's always treating you poorly if you allow your mom to treat you poorly.
Right. And so people can say, like, I'm going to continue to be there for this person while they work on themselves.
Yes.
That is their decision. But you've now moved your boundary a little bit. You know, you've now wiggled it to say, like, well, as long as you're still working on yourself, then I'll allow you to treat me the way that you're treating me. And to sit with, like, I'm making this choice. I'm allowing this behavior. And I'm making this justification because they're working on themselves.
Yes.
But you don't have to. Um, and and again, like it's not from a place of like you should feel shamed, but it's a place of empowerment to say like I've chosen this. And if you can say like I'm choosing to not hold this boundary with this person, I'm going to deal with the consequences of it. That is 100,000% your decision, but it's your choice.
Right. Right. And you need to be aware that you're consciously making that choice,
Right.
right? Like this isn't happening to you. You're making the choice. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with making that choice, but you need to understand that it's a choice you're making.
Right. And so yeah, so much of it again just goes back to like we create the reality that we live in. We
Yes.
decide how people treat us. We decide what we will allow. And it's hard when you start to do that, to say that like I've made this choice.
Mhm.
I've made these choices in the past. I'm making these choices now. But to have control over it and to say, like, is an empowering position to be in, even if it's a tough pill to swallow.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it has been so fun to chat with you about this. I think that it is a topic that we should all talk about and explore more because it can be so life-changing. So life-changing to realize that we teach people how we want to be treated. And it can have an enormous impact on our reality. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here with us at Rose Quartz Mediumship Podcast, Laura. We will link your website and your business to this podcast. And I so appreciate you spending time with us and sharing your story and everything that you've been through and how you landed in such a beautiful place of being able to set and hold boundaries in such a beautiful way. It has been really fun to witness you on that journey, and it's been really fun to chat with you about it today.
And thank you for having me.
Absolutely.